Welcome to Work from the Inside Out, a podcast that highlights real-life stories, practical strategies, and best practices for transitioning your career from unhappiness and dissatisfaction to fulfillment, meaning, and joy. Now here is your host, career and executive coach, Tammy Guler-Loeb.
Hey everybody. I am so delighted to introduce my guest today, Jeff Gothelf. Jeff helps organizations build better products and executives build the cultures that build better products. Through the use of concepts like design thinking, lean UX, and agile software development, he brings a new approach to running organizations and the departments within them, most recently focusing on human resources and how they can be more agile, as well as supporting agility in the organization. He is the co-author of the award-winning Lean UX and the Harvard Business Review press book, Sense and Respond. Starting off as a software designer, Jeff now works as a coach, consultant, and keynote speaker, helping companies bridge the gaps between business agility, digital transformation, product management, and human-centered design. His most recent book, Forever Employable, was published in June 2020. Please join me in welcoming Jeff Gothelf.
Hey, Tammy. Thank you so much, Tammy. It's a pleasure to be here. Thanks so much for having me on the show.
Great. Well, Jeff, thank you for joining us from your home in Barcelona, Spain, one of my favorite cities.
Sounds so fancy when you say it that way.
Well, it is fancy. It's fancy and it's lovely. I love Barcelona. So, Jeff, as you know, Work from the Inside Out, it's all about the journey that many of us have been on in our careers, our professional lives, trying to make meaning out of it. And most of us have started somewhere. Take us back to some of your earlier years and how they might have informed or not where you are now.
It's interesting thinking back. I mean, I can think back to all of the jobs I've ever had. And, I started with my paper route when I was 14, always staying focused, always working, trying to hustle, trying to make some money, trying to figure out how to get ahead. But if you're looking at if I'm looking at sort of foundational stuff, and it's interesting to tie it to kind of what I'm doing today. Growing up, I grew up in New Jersey. I grew up wanting to be in the 80s, to be clear. I grew up wanting to be a rock star. Like that's all I wanted to be. I wanted to be Bon Jovi. I wanted to be Springsteen. I wanted to be, Skid Row. I wanted to be Sebastian Bach from Skid Row. Growing up, I wasn't the singer. I was never the singer. I'm a piano player, keyboard player. And for me, that really drove everything. In high school, I played in bands. In college, I played in bands. And bands they're a labor of love. It's a startup, really. If you think about it, a band is a startup. You and your friends get together. You have a crazy idea that you think is going to change the world. Everyone's going to love it. You pour everything that you have into it, literally everything, every minute, every dollar. You suffer for it. You struggle for it. You work crappy jobs for it. You hustle for it, in the hopes that you can build some kind of a viable entity with an audience and a following. And it's interesting looking back. It took me a long time when I stopped playing music, and I played until my mid to late 20s. When I stopped playing, sort of really trying to be a rock star, it took me a really long time to come back. It took me like a full decade to come back around to this kind of entrepreneurial vibe that the attempts at being a successful musician echoed, even though I didn't really realize I was doing that back then. I spent a decade sort of just, climbing the corporate ladder like everybody else. But in hindsight, so much of what I'm doing today is the realization of those dreams. Just the stages that I'm on aren't rock and roll stages. They're conference stages, or they're, teaching a workshop, or these days just Zoom screens. But that's kind of where things started, I would say.
Yeah. But you did go to college, right? You didn't just graduate high school and start touring with your band,
I did.
right?
Yes. I did go to college. So I played in high school, and then I went to college. I went to James Madison University in Virginia.
JMU, yay.
JMU, yeah. A significantly larger school today than it was when I went there.
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah, it's huge now. I think there were only like 10,000 students when I attended in the early 90s. These days, I think it's 23,000 or more.
It's a big school. I've been there, yeah.
Yeah, and it's super popular with New York tri-state area folks, in New York, New Jersey, Connecticut. It was always super popular school. And I went to college, and it's interesting. It felt like my timing, forever, was like just arriving just a little bit too late, right? Mm-hmm. We arrived. I was getting a degree in mass communication. And I graduated in 1995, which is the year that Netscape, the first visual browser, came out and redefined mass communication. So everything we had done the previous 4 years was instantly moot with, Netscape coming out there. But yeah, but school, played music through school and really tried to maintain it after school, working just kind of crappy jobs and hustling. And then eventually you kind of have to look at the writing on the wall at some point and make a decision about whether you're going to stay hungry and broke for a while longer, or you're going to try to do something that will, at the very least, it might be less exciting than going out on tour every week with your best friends, but you'll eat better and you'll sleep in a nice house and you'll have money to go on dates with girls and, stuff like that I wanted to do and couldn't do before. So it was, so kind of a lifestyle decision, I guess, at that point.
A lifestyle decision. Yeah. What I'm also hearing though, and I know you wrote about this in your book, Forever Employable, there's a lot of learning from those years too, that you've taken forward with you.
Absolutely. I mean, look, the reality is that there's that entrepreneurial spirit, that belief that you've got something to contribute that's unique and that the world will appreciate. And to be perfectly transparent, at some point, the world will pay you for. And that the way to do that is to get up on a stage and to share that thing in, whatever medium or channel or distribution method makes the most sense, or that you feel strongly about, and really try to reach that audience. And it's interesting because, like I said, it took me a decade to really come back to that. And when I gave up playing music, or at least trying to be a full-time rock star, I got a regular job in the internet. I was a designer and a product manager and a team leader. I spent a decade climbing the corporate ladder. And then when I turned 35, it dawned on me that I would I woke up on the morning of my 35th birthday terrified. I was terrified that I would in 5 years from then, I'd be 40, I would be old, I would be expensive and unemployable. And I was really worried about being able to feed my family, feed my kids, and pay the mortgage and that type of thing. And that's when the entrepreneurial spirit kicked back in. That's when it came back and it said, look, if you play by other people's rules, then you'll always be at the mercy of those other people. But if you can reinvent your career by essentially becoming entrepreneurial about your career, not necessarily starting a company per se, but to kind of borrow the title of Reid Hoffman's book, The Startup of You, right? If you can think of yourself as a startup and be entrepreneurial about that, then at the very least, you're in charge, right? You're in charge if you win, you're in charge if you lose, but there's no one else to blame here, and you're not at the mercy of anybody else. And to me, that was really kind of the reawakening of that, and what I've been doing for the last 13 years, which has been, it took a long time to get there, but I live in Barcelona, like you mentioned. I live here because of that. I'm able to sort of live wherever I want at the moment because of that, and we've chosen to live in a lovely place, like you mentioned.
Right. So you turned 35 and you kind of had it sounds like a light bulb went on over your head. But it sounds like it wasn't just an instantaneous, I think I'll be an entrepreneur. It was more like a shift in your mindset about how you wanted to think about your career and approach how you would go forward professionally. It sounds like you weren't just saying, oh, I've got to get out of my job immediately. It was more how you were going to embrace your professional life and what that meant for you at that moment. It sounds like you weren't quite sure yet. You just knew that you had to take charge or take greater ownership of where things were going to go rather than assuming that an employer was going to create the framework for you. Am I getting that right?
Yeah, I had no intention of quitting my job or quitting any job. I was fully expecting to continue to work for someone in-house to continue to climb the corporate ladder. I just wanted to create a situation where those opportunities were chasing me rather than me chasing those opportunities. That was the dynamic that I wanted to create, right? And that was kind of when I talk about, kind of I'm in charge and I play by my rules, that's what I'm trying to create. I'm trying to create a situation where the next opportunity finds me rather than me saying, okay, I've done 3-4 years at this place, which in internet years is a lifetime.
Right.
And instead of me saying, okay, where am I going to go to next? I want there to be half a dozen options waiting for me when I'm ready to go to the next thing.
Right.
And that to me was the sort of the path to, or that was sort of at the time, it was the definition of forever employable, right? So if I'm forever employable, then there's always somewhere for me to go next. There's always an opportunity and it's something that I want to do.
So those 10 years from deciding not to be a rock star anymore to entering the corporate world, it sounds like you were able to find your way into the corporate world, and then sort of one thing led to another kind of organically, would you say? I know that a lot of people seem to have found their way professionally when they say they've climbed the corporate ladder. I hear a lot of people say, well, I was in one job and then something else opened up in the company, or a friend of mine in another company had an opportunity and it would have been a step up for me. And they kind of tapped me on the shoulder and brought me in. And I haven't even written my resume in 10 or 20 years, or, I've barely had to interview. They just recommended me. And, I've had people in my coaching practice come to me and have said, I haven't interviewed for a job in over 20 years. I haven't had to write a resume in 20 years because they've essentially, through networking, even though some people don't realize that's networking, they've basically, they think they've gotten away with something when in fact they've proven themselves all these years. They've worked for it, but they don't really give themselves enough credit, but they think they've just sort of glided from one thing to the next when they've put in the work. So I'm making an assumption and you can correct me, but it sounds like that was kind of your story, that those 10 years you kind of moved from one thing to the next based on people probably noticing you and appreciating your work and moving you from one place to the next, and you saying, oh, thank you, I'll step into that.
So eventually, yes, but there was kind of one step and one hiccup ahead of that before I got to that position in my career.
Well, so tell us about the transition too. I'm curious. I think people might be curious about the transition from music to the more conventional life. How that went.
Yeah. So that's 1999. I'm 26. I'm broke, and I don't want to. I needed to find some more income, and music wasn't cutting it. Now, the nice thing about 1999, it was the dawn of Web 1.0. And I always had a knack for computers and a bit of programming. And in 1999, if you could spell HTML, which was the markup language that makes up websites, you could get a job. And I could do more than spell HTML. I could actually write it and do a little bit of graphic design. And because it was a ridiculous time, if you worked in tech in the late 90s before the crash, it was ridiculous. Like you would walk in and it'd say, I'm only half joking, they would say, "Can you spell HTML?" And I said, "HTML." And I said, "You got the job. You're hired." That's it. Like, like that was the gig. And so that was easy once I got in. And we learned on the job, and it was web design work, and it was relatively easy work, and it was fun, and it was exciting. There was so much money being thrown around.
Yeah.
And we were learning on the company dime and on the client's dime, really more than anything.
Yeah.
And as that career was progressing in a particular direction, well, then the dot-com bubble popped. And that was a tricky time, right? That was a lot of hopping around and maneuvering from place to place to place, because, you'd get the next job and it would shut down, or you'd get the next job and there was a massive layoff.
Right.
And so there was a couple of years there bouncing around before things settled down again. And then my reputation as a good web designer, as a good interaction designer, as a good design manager began to take hold and build up sort of that traditional path. But I was still interviewing. I mean, there was no doubt about it. I was still doing interviews, but the leads came in, but I was still doing the interviews.
So I'm curious then, because you had this awakening from music to going a more traditional route, right? And you were, really looking for more stability. And then you're in the middle of this, very exciting but tumultuous period. Was there a point as you were going from one thing to another and things were kind of crashing and then companies starting up and falling apart? Was there any point at which you thought, gee, maybe I ought to, go find something that has a pension plan or something?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, look, we bounced around. I mean, we were, look, in 2001, in 1999, I got my first kind of real post rock and roll job.
Right.
In 2001, I got married. The dot-com bubble crashed. I went to grad school in Boston, started a new job, found out we were having our first kid.
Oh,
and
wow.
then company, like everything you're not supposed to do, everything is supposed to really kind of challenge your marriage and your relationship and all those things. Like all those things happened all at once. And yeah, we bounced around between sort of Virginia and Massachusetts for a couple of years. I went to the West Coast. I thought maybe the West Coast would be better, worked in Portland, Oregon. And then again, it happened again. And my wife was like, well, we need to go somewhere. At that point, we were having a second kid. And my wife said, look, we got to go somewhere where we have some support, because if this keeps happening, we just need an extra room in someone's house to live in.
Yeah.
And that's when we ended up back in New York, where my family is. And, but yeah, there was definitely a time where it was like, look, this tech thing, if it doesn't settle down, I got to figure out something else. I mean, it's not like I didn't see a future in tech, but there was an extreme lack of stability. And those, like you said, those sort of bank jobs were looking pretty good, pre 2008. So everything was
So, but something told you to hang in there. Something was compelling you to stick with it, with all the moves and the transitions.
There's such potential. I mean, look, with technology, and I still see it today. There's such tremendous potential with tech. And even back then, the fact that we were in the early days just literally putting up digital brochures was clearly only the beginning of the power of this thing. And the transformation, if you think about it from sort of 2001 to today, 20 years later, the transformation is ridiculous. We were literally putting up digital brochures 20 years ago.
Yeah.
And today there is, infinite business and work potential driven by this technology.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's almost like if you blink, it'll change again.
Yeah.
It's pretty amazing. Yeah. So we know that you hung in there with it.
Mm-hmm.
So a marriage, two kids later. Did you stop? Did you stop at 2?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
2 kids later. And I also, now we know, well, I know that you stopped working for other people too. So what what was that transition about? Because you turned 35 and there was still not the expectation that you would necessarily stop working for other entities, but there was that wake up call that I am going to be in charge going from here on out. It's really in my hands to make sure that I'm forever employable. So what was the next transition like, or what sparked that for you?
So the decision was, look, I'm going to create a situation where opportunities find me. And the only way that I knew how to do that, and the only way I really know how to do that today, is to create a presence, to create an awareness that I exist, to create it. You can call it a personal brand. You can call it an online presence, a reputation, thought leadership, build an audience, a platform. There's 1,000 words to describe the same thing. But the goal here is to make sure that people are aware that I exist, that people know what I'm good at. They know what problem I help them solve, so that when they need that problem solved, they will come to me. And so while I was still employed in-house, I began to do that. I began to do that by sharing what I was doing professionally, by writing about it and by speaking about it at conferences. And the work that I was doing professionally was cutting edge work, cutting edge because I was working in tech, and tech is like we said, is rapidly evolving and it's always changing. And the kind of challenges that my team and I were solving at work are the kind of challenges that pretty much every other software development team in the world was dealing with. And so there was an audience for this. There were people who were dealing with this problem, and I was willing to step out there and say, look, this is what we're doing, and this is how it's going. And sometimes it goes well, and sometimes it's terrible. But we're learning things. And I began to create that presence for myself so that when it was time to leave full-time employment, a couple of people who I'd met through that thought leadership came to me and said, hey, let's start an agency together. Let's build a company together. And despite it being a terrifying proposition for me, to not know where the next paycheck was going to come from without any real stability and not a massive runway, to be very clear, I had about 3 months with a runway to start generating some income from this. We jumped. Yeah, but nothing.
That's a short runway.
Yeah, and nothing, turns the gears like having a short runway, and your kids are like, what's for dinner? And you're like, oh, okay. Right. And so, right, exactly. Ramen again, Dad. And so, exactly. I mean, it's like that. And so, but that is, that was the next big step, another entrepreneurial move. And we were using the thought leadership, right, the presence to market that business. Yeah, right? Because that business sold services based around the kind of content that I was generating at that point. Mm-hmm. And so we launched an agency called Neo. It's a software product development studio in New York. And that ended up growing into a 7-office business around the world, which is super interesting and fun and terrifying. And then we sold that business to a bigger agency in 2015. And I've been self-employed since then. Because I was maintaining the thought leadership throughout the life of the services business. When it sold, I just took my little chunk out and just rebranded it strictly under my name, and continued headed in that direction.
I see. So it all sounds so easy.
Yeah.
Or not easy. It doesn't sound easy. It sounds simple. It sounds so straightforward, but I know it's not.
Well, it is simple, right? I mean, look, if you think about it, and this is the thing, I think, but there's a difference between simple and easy.
That's right. There is.
Like people ask me about moving to Spain. They're like, what was moving to Spain like? I was like, it was tedious, but it wasn't hard. Right. Like there was like 1,000 tiny steps because of Spanish bureaucracy. Right. But beyond that, like, it's not hard. If you want to get up and move to Spain tomorrow, you can do it, right? It's not a difficult process. It's tedious, right? Yeah. The steps that I took in my career, like you said, they're simple steps, right? I created content. I quit my job and started an agency, right? Yeah. But they're not easy steps,
Right.
Right. So, and so there's a difference there, because the path is logical. But again, like I didn't have a ton of runway, and stepping out on my own was terrifying. And, when we sold the business and essentially the acquiring company showed no interest in my little thought leadership bit, I was like, well, what am I going to do with this thing? I guess I could step out on my own. And it was, again, there's so much to try. And there's so much anxiety about making sure that it works. And if it doesn't work, you can really get wrapped up in that darkness, right? There's a whole, like, if you've ever done any kind of consulting work, or if you've ever been self-employed, that it's a cyclical business, generally speaking.
Yes.
And there's always that part of the year where you're like, the pipeline is dry, there's nothing coming in, and you're like, man, this is it. No one's ever going to hire me again. It's over.
Yeah.
Right. And that's part of the process. So that part is not easy, right? That part is hard, because you really got to push through that, and sustain and maintain if this is truly what you want. And I honestly can't imagine it any other way now. I think it would be for me personally, after now being six years out on my own, it would be fairly soul crushing to go back and work for somebody else.
Yes. Yeah. I can concur with that.
Yeah.
So, but there is a fine line, isn't there, Jeff? And I'm asking you this, partially from my own experience too. But I think our listeners would be interested in this. So, we say there's a difference between easy and simple, and the notion that, when you said it's terrifying. What's terrifying? What was terrifying about it? What were you afraid of?
Look, you grow up in America. That's my experience, right? So you grow up in the US, and it's beaten into your head that you've got this path to follow, right? You go to high school, you go to college, you get your first job, then you make you work for a little while, then you make a slightly, lateral move, maybe for a little bit more money or a slightly better title, and you climb the corporate ladder until you become a director, a VP, an executive, right? And that's when you finally make it, right? That's the path that people sell you. And we sell that path to our kids. That's the path that I was taught. That's the path that my parents followed, and when you sort of realize that the viability of that path, the stability of that path isn't necessarily there anymore.
Yeah.
And remember, as awesome as technology is, it's a massive disrupting force.
Yeah.
And so the stability and the loyalty that organizations once had in their structure and to their staff, that doesn't exist anymore.
Right.
And when you realize that, well, that's terrifying, because what else am I going to do? My whole life, people have told me that this is the path. Right. And so some people will suffer through it and just kind of pound through it. And then other folks like me, who surprised themselves with an entrepreneurial streak they didn't know they had, will say, okay, well, I've got to try this out. Right. Mm-hmm. I've got to try to get around this, because I don't like the lack of control.
Yes.
Right. I don't like the instability. I want to be in control of my life.
Right.
And so that's the first terrifying thing, is that the line, the story that I was fed my whole life wasn't true anymore.
Yeah.
All right. And then like, okay, great. Well, it's not true anymore. Well, I got to go figure out how to survive on my own. And, when I stepped out on my own, I was making $175,000 a year, living in suburban New York City, hand to mouth. Outside of like the 6% 401k contribution that was being carved off every couple of weeks from my paycheck, everything else was being spent every month. I could not save a thing. $175,000, right?
That's and that was incredible. That's living in the greater New York area, a family of 4.
Yeah, and my wife didn't work outside of the home.
Okay,
right. So single income family, and so. And then you're like, wait, so I'm going to stop collecting this paycheck every 2 weeks and head out on my own and figure out how to make at least $175,000 somehow, that's terrifying, right? Like to me, that was, I had to figure out how to do that. And so that all of those things are terrifying. When we formed the agency, we formed it because a couple of us brought in a couple of clients. And so we were able to pay ourselves some money and then relatively quickly get back up to that 175 a month. But because we were running the organization, we actually never gave ourselves a raise in 4 years. And when that organization sold, I found myself back in the same position. I was like, again, I'm not going to go to the acquiring organization. I got a little bit of money for it, not nothing life-changing. I got a little bit more runway that time. Maybe it was like 9 months worth of runway, roughly speaking. But again, it was like, okay, now what? And so it's this like continuous reinvention. And it becomes less and less terrifying, I think, the more that you do it. But certainly the first couple of times, I was genuinely concerned about feeding my family. Like that was my concern, right?
Yeah. And yet somewhere I'm wondering, is there a place where you do kind of calm yourself down and trust yourself that you will make it all right, or that you and your wife will figure it out if the other shoe drops? I think about someone listening to this who maybe isn't a corporate type person or works in another sector or isn't an entrepreneurial type of person, and yet would like to feel that they could feel that sense of greater control over their career going forward. What page out of your book could they take if they're not necessarily the thought leadership type of person? There's probably different versions of this for different people, right?
There are. And to me, the single greatest asset that you have is your experience.
Yes.
It's the things that you have done. And so the challenge I would put forward to individuals like this, like the ones you described, is how can you distribute that experience in new and different and diverse ways? Currently, the way that you distribute that experience is by selling it to a company or to a client, right? What else could you do with that experience? How else could you share it?
Right.
What else could you build around it? And you have reach to literally every connected person in the world. So billions of people.
Yep.
Right. For example, I've written a few books. The most recent one is self-published. Right. You can self-publish on the Amazon platform. Amazon's got self-publishing tools. You can do the whole thing there overnight, without anybody else participating in this process. You can be an internationally published author.
Yeah.
Right. That was impossible 10 years ago.
Right.
Unless you had, unless you were an author, right? Or got a book deal.
Right.
But you can literally wake up tomorrow, and if you decide to do it, you could have an internationally published ebook in a month. Right. And so my challenge to these folks is, what can you do with your experience? What else can you do with it? Right? How else can you share it? Can you monetize it? What can you build around it? And if you're not the kind of person, and again, I got my practice being in bands. So if you're not the kind of person who's comfortable in front of a crowd or in front of people or sharing that, then can you write?
Yeah.
Can you record videos? Can you host a podcast? Can you make infographics? Can you, I don't know. Can you tweet? Can you coach? I genuinely believe that there's an infinite number of things that you can do.
You have to think creatively, though.
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, I think there's a point where, I could hear someone on the other end thinking, well, not everyone could do this. It's like, you know what? You're right. Not everyone could do this. However, you have to be willing to take some chances. You have to be willing to put your ego on the line a little bit And you have to put your ego aside and say, you know what? I have to be a little vulnerable here. I mean, that's exactly what you did. You know, when you say you were terrified, that's like putting your ego right out there front and center, right?
Sure.
And yet you also have to have a healthy enough ego and believe in yourself enough and trust yourself enough that you're going to find a way to make something work, or at least learn from whatever doesn't work. And so, I think that there's lots of ways to take a book like Forever Employable and look at the guidelines that you suggest to people, and that it's not about necessarily becoming a thought leader the way you have put thought leadership out there. Not that there's anything wrong. I mean, obviously, it's a great model that you provide here. But I think if people take the step-by-step approach that you provide here and apply it to themselves in the context that makes sense for them, there's a lot of different ways to go about doing this. But I find that a lot of people, often when they're left to their own devices in their own heads, they don't think as creatively. And it's often helpful if you maybe have a conversation with another person about it. Not that I'm suggesting you hire a coach necessarily, and I'm really not, although it's always a good idea, but it's not always the something that someone can do. But I'm curious, as you wrote Forever Employable and you put together this, wonderful step-by-step approach, were you, where were your supports, or were there people who you bounced these ideas around with? Did you get support along the way? I'm guessing you didn't come up with all of this completely by yourself, that there must have been some context in which you were able to create all of this within. And, I'm just going to, just to share with the audience, you put out 5 steps: plant a flag, tell your story, follow the new path, teach, give it all away. And then at the end, you talk about future proofing your career. I mean, I think it's a very well written book myself.
Thank you.
I do. I find it very readable, very easy to follow. And I like the way you put yourself in the book and you share your story. And there's a lot of examples that you give throughout the book too, to give people a context for it. So I'm going on and on here. Why don't you share a little bit about how you created the steps and how the book came about? Because you were immersed in your thought leadership in the tech world. So what made you decide even to write this book?
When I decided to do this, there were people that I admired that had been doing this. So the first thing I was doing was just watching what they were doing. And then in paying attention to others who had already done this, what was successful for them, reaching out, engaging, asking smart questions, hopefully contributing a thought here or there, but really starting to inject myself into conversations with folks who had done this before. There was a lot of putting yourself out there. There's a lot of, here's my idea, what do you think? There's a lot of shouting into the void, blog posts that nobody ever read, even though they're published online, conference speaking submissions that never got responses, things like that. But you just keep pushing yourself out there, putting yourself out there, and you keep, pushing forward. There are, individuals, helping others be successful. It's one of those, the rising tide lifts all boats kind of theory, right? So we managed to be around Eric Ries, for example, as the whole lean startup thing was coming into formation, as he was gaining notoriety and attention for that idea, and then ultimately his book. And we managed to be a part of that conversation pretty significantly in the early days. And Eric has been always nothing but generous and kind and reciprocal for that over the years. And so that was super helpful. really, I remember the first time I'd been giving talks at events a few times, but somebody asked me to teach a workshop, which meant I've never taught anything. And they wanted me to fill an 8-hour day, like a 1-day workshop, which to me felt like an eternity.
Yeah.
How am I going to do it? And so the conference organizer, his name is Jared Spool, he said, look, I want you to teach a workshop about this idea of lean UX. Was the first book that I wrote. And he said, I said, Jared, I don't know how to teach a workshop. I have no idea. He said, don't worry, I'll teach you. I'll teach you how to do it. Right. And because look, it's his event.
Right.
And if I flop at his event,
right,
it reflects poorly on me. It reflects worse on him. No one's coming back to his event if he's got terrible workshop facilitators. But he taught me, and he's been super generous to me over the years. And so folks want to see you succeed. And the amazing thing is even though it may not seem like it, there's an infinite amount of space for new voices. Because people move on, right? People get older, get more experience, start to pay attention to somebody new. And so there's always room for new voices to come into the conversation. And so as I began to build this thought leadership platform, publishing Lean UX my first book was very successful and continues to be. People kept asking, hey, literally an email or two every week. Hey, Jeff, how did you get that book deal? How did you get that speaking gig? How did you build this following? That type of thing. And to me, right now, my mind operates as I'm always seeking opportunities, right? To me, that was an opportunity. Somebody said, to me, I keep getting regular weekly requests about this content that I've never written about. Maybe I should write about it. And it was an item in my backlog, right? It was just kind of sitting there in my to-do list of yes, I'll get around to writing an article or a blog post or something about this. And then I hired a coach. I did. I hired a business coach.
How about that?
I did. And she came highly, highly recommended from a colleague of mine whose opinion I respect. And he told me, he said, look, I've been working with this woman. She's been, doing this forever. And she's super, super great at this. And so we met, we started talking. And at one point I mentioned to her that this thing has been all this inbound demand has been coming in and this thing's sitting in my backlog, but I haven't done anything about it. She goes, why not? I said, I don't know. I don't have time. I can't prioritize it. And she kicked my ass. She was like, this needs to come out of your backlog immediately into the top of your to-do list. And sure enough, with her help, with that motivation, with that push, this thing began to see the light of day. And I had plenty of support. I hired a team to help support the creation of this thing. You can't really, I talked earlier about how you could actually publish a Kindle book in a month if you wanted to. But if you want to do a good job, you hire a team, you hire editors and proofreaders and cover designers and, developmental editors and that type of thing. And so you hire the team and you get it done and we got it done. And, it's been out for almost a year at this point. And really, it's been a really interesting path and process. But it was a long time coming and no shortage of obstacles to having it see the light of day.
Yes. Yeah. So great story. I love it, because I'm sure there are people still saying to you, as I just did, you're the lean UX guy. Why did you write a book about finding work, right?
Yeah.
And but I see the thread now. I see the whole thread. It makes perfect sense. And having spoken to you before, I knew how you felt about this, and we're very aligned on a lot of this. This is really helpful. And so I think there's a lot of value in people really taking a look at Forever Employable, especially if you're concerned about where you're going and wanting to take charge and be in control of where you're going next. Another way that you can also be in charge is to join Jeff's community. Jeff has a Becoming Forever Employable community. Can you tell us a little more about that?
Yes. So in an effort to provide a space for folks who are thinking about doing this, who have started down this path, who are significantly down this path, we've built a community. It's free. It's called Becoming Forever Employable, and you can get there by going to becoming.foreveremployable.com. And it is a place for folks who want to take their expertise and build a reputation around it, build that audience, build that network, future-proof their career, with the purpose of providing you with a community of like-minded people who will provide you feedback on your ideas and your writing and whatever presentation material you care to share. Accountability, if you want it, right? This is work. And sometimes it takes somebody to be like, hey, Jeff, did you write your blog post this week? Or, hey, Jeff, did you finish your presentation? So feedback, accountability, and then mutual amplification, right? We've got, at this point, we've got about 100 people in there, 120 people in there at the moment. And, if you need your stuff amplified, put it in there, and half a dozen folks will retweet it, like it, share it, tell their community about it. And so really kind of help each other grow together. Again, rising tide lifting all boats. And so if this is something that you're interested in, it doesn't matter what your professional experience is. It doesn't have to be tech. It's not overwhelmingly a tech group per se. You could be in any kind of knowledge work, HR, finance, or legal, or perhaps not. I think this is perfectly viable for folks who bake cakes or who fix plumbing or who make furniture or whatever it is. Like there's no reason why that can't also be the platform upon which you become forever employable.
Right. Absolutely. Well, the world always will need cakes, right?
Absolutely.
Although I will say now that we're sort of beginning to come off the pandemic, I don't think I'll ever look at blowing out the candles on a birthday cake the same ever again. But that's another story.
Yeah.
So the community, is it open to anyone? So it's just a generous offering that you are offering this to anyone who wants to join.
Yeah, it is. We're letting people in. So you apply to join, and then we let people in. We just started about a month ago, and so we're scaling slowly, just so it doesn't kind of get out of control. So we let about 15 to 20 people in every Monday, and they introduce themselves, and then they grow. And the idea is that really the community interacts with itself. I dip in and out every a couple times a week, say hello, answer some questions, offer some advice, and we've got a couple of community managers in there, making sure that everything's going okay, asking some questions, connecting folks. But yeah, absolutely. Come on in. Doesn't matter where you are in your career. I think you'll find a very welcoming group of folks there.
That's wonderful. That is wonderful. That sounds like a fabulous opportunity. So, and along the same lines, Jeff, so if you were talking to somebody who is at that point, maybe they've just turned 35, or for some people, they've just turned 40 or 45, and they've said, wow, I think it's time for me to be the one in charge. I'm ready to make that transition or that pivot. What piece of advice would you give them if you had to give them just one key piece of advice?
Start writing. Yep. That's my piece of advice. In fact, I wrote about it on my blog today, again, which is sort of meta because I wrote about writing, right? But that's my advice. Start writing. I cannot think, it's honestly like, I just want to go back and say, like, if I could go back in time, knowing a little bit of what I know today, I would focus so much more of my school time energy on learning how to write. It took me forever to learn how to write in a decent way. Really, I mean, even writing my first book, the first book was so difficult to write. So start writing, because writing, first of all, it forces you to think through your ideas, number one.
Yeah.
Number two, it forces you to think about how you're going to tell that story so you become a better storyteller. And it challenges you to communicate an idea in a way that reaches your audience in a way that they want to be reached. And so it's humbling. And you're really kind of taking your ideas and sort of smashing them up against the rocks and then reassembling them. And it is such a powerful way to become comfortable with your experiences and with your stories. And the more that you do it, the better that you get at it. And sometimes, just a quick anecdote on this, because this is something that stuck with me for a couple of years. So before the pandemic, I was traveling for work about 50% of the time. And I ended up doing a one-day workshop for EA Games, Electronic Arts, out in California. One legendary software video game maker.
Yes.
And I spent a day with some of their teams. And at the end of the day, the woman who hired me came to me and she said, "Jeff, that was really great." She said, "Everything that you taught us today, I already knew. But what you gave me was a vocabulary to use when describing this way of working." And for that, I'm super grateful. And that's stuck with me for a couple of years now, because the only reason I have that vocabulary is because I've been telling the same damn story now for 10 years, right? For 12 years, right? But I write about it all the time, and I speak about it all the time, and I teach it all the time. And I've gotten very, very, very good at telling this particular story, to the point where the telling of the story, not just the content, was super valuable to my clients. And so to me, it's start writing and practice telling your story.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent point. I want to add to that and say that, people who, I hear this all the time, and I have to even talk myself out of it sometimes, that if you think that you're going to come up with some new information or new ideas, that's not really the point of all this. The point of all this is to put your mark on it. You're the one like what you just said, this woman said to you, it wasn't that you spoke about something she wasn't already familiar with, but you brought it to her in a way that gave her new language or a new contextual way of looking at it. And I think that's where we bring our uniqueness to a lot of what we do. Those of us who are willing to get up on the stage or speak out or show up in a certain way. And if we can, as I said earlier, kind of park our egos and just speak up or write or however it is that we express ourselves, we have to realize that, a lot of people may already have some familiarity with what we're talking about, but they're not going to see it. They're not going to have seen it the way we are sharing it with them.
Yes.
And that's where we can express our brand or have our unique position. And we have to feel good about that. That's why we're showing up for this. That's how you become forever employable, right?
Yes, that's exactly right. Because people will always get stuck. They'll say, "Well, how? What do I have to share?" Right?
Right.
Everything's been said about everything.
Here. There's nothing new here. It's like, okay, it may not be new, but there are new ways to look at it. There's always a new context, a new perspective, new language, and that changes the way people will behave and respond to all kinds of things. And so think about a situation where you've been in that maybe it's the situation you've been in before, but somebody says something in a different way to you or responds to you differently. And all of a sudden you're seeing that same old situation in a new way, and you have a whole new perspective. So hold on to that idea, because that's how we all get to become thought leaders, is by bringing out our own unique perspective. There you go.
Yep.
That's it. So Jeff, any other parting words before we sign off here?
We talked a lot about some really interesting approaches to becoming and staying forever employable. I will warn you, this is work. It's real work, and it takes focus, and it takes dedication, and it takes consistency. But it is, in my opinion, it is the most rewarding work that you can do, because you made it happen.
Yeah.
Right. And it's you're sharing your experience, you're helping other people solve their problems, and you're making it happen. So to me, it's worth every second of work, because it eventually will free you to do whatever it is you want to do.
Yeah.
And provide you with these opportunities that I think everybody's seeking. And so, but just be prepared for it. It's work. It's not going to just happen.
Right. Absolutely. And so thank you for that. I'm glad you said that. And what's the best way for people to find you and learn more about your work?
The best way people to find me is jeffgothelf.com. By far, everything's there. And then, of course, please do feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. I do a lot of writing there, a lot of sharing there. So that would be great. LinkedIn, and then, of course, my website, jeffgothelf.com.
Great. Well, Jeff, thank you so much for being here today. Everything that we've been talking about here will be in the show notes, so people will be able to find you very easily. And thank you so much for being here today. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure, Tammy. This was really fun. Thank you for having me.
I hope you enjoyed my interview with Jeff Gothelf. It was so interesting to speak with him about his professional transitions. What is your key takeaway from our interview? If you are interested in any of the resources or links mentioned in today's podcast, you can find them on the blog page of my website at tammygoolerloeb.com. Just look for episode 140. Are you thinking about what your next professional move is going to be? Maybe you're feeling just a little stuck. Stay tuned for my new book, Work from the Inside Out: Break Through 9 Common Obstacles to Design a Career That Fulfills You. It'll be available in November 2021, print and digital ebook editions through my website, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and independent bookstores. If you were inspired by this episode with Jeff, please share it with your friends and colleagues, and do subscribe so you don't miss next week's show. Remember, subscribing is always free. Are you enjoying the podcast? I'd appreciate your review on Apple Podcasts. It's easy to find through my website at workfromtheinsideout.com. Just click on the Apple Podcast button and follow the instructions provided there. Thank you so much for listening, and remember, it's never too late or too impossible to increase your sense of fulfillment and satisfaction in your work and other meaningful activities. I'd love to hear how it's going for you. Feel free to drop me a line. Bye for now.
Thank you for listening to the Work from the Inside Out podcast. For more information, you can find us at www.workfromtheinsideout.com.